Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Dubill, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man whose string quartet recital has been canceled due to the evacuation.
Tim Longo.
You got any ideas there? Did that stick out to you at all?
It does, sort of.
I'll give you a clue.
It might be too nuanced for me.
Yeah, on the other side, there were two misspellings. One was the name Henry, which had an extra E, Henrey, and the other one was a phrase returning the keys, but instead of ing, the extremely well-known participle ending ing, which literally no one would ever misspell, was return on the keys, ONG. This is, as you were saying in pre-show, this is an alternate universe game in which Henry has an E between the R and the Y, and participles ending ONG. I'm climbing up the ladder or the crates that I have stacked. It is, wow.
Climbing up the crates you stacked is generous.
Yes. Well, oh boy, I have a lot to say about stacking crates, but we'll get there. So yes, that was both the misspellings and the string quartet recital canceled due to evacuation were on a whiteboard.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
What I'm thinking of as a security building, I guess, in the little village. It's kind of the main town. There's like three streets, which are Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. I mean, it's just Wells, Rue de Jules Verne. So one is in French. One is Wells Road, and the other one, it's not coming to me. I was disappointed.
Main Street or something?
Oh, and one of them is Main Street. Yeah, I was disappointed that it wasn't Doyle, because Arthur Conan Doyle wrote The Lost World.
That's a missed opportunity.
Perfect opportunity, but maybe, in this alternate universe with ONG endings, it was he never wrote that book, and the only Lost World is
well, there is a sequel to the game in the alternate universe that we'll never get to play, but it does exist in Earth 313.
That could be.
Yeah.
I have some bones to pick with that particular level. I mean, I have bones to pick everywhere, much like the dinosaurs, I suppose. But that was a moment where I was just like, everything in this game is it's skewed. It's through a glass darkly. It is just like, it is a funhouse mirror of what we do in games, in a way where, like, I think that if your island is being evacuated due to dinosaur infestation, nobody stops to write down that the string quartet has been canceled. The recital, I think it's taken as read. There will be no recital because we're being evacuated from the island. Like, you don't have to put that on the calendar. It was just so strange.
I took that as the early zombie apocalypse. Where often in that fiction there's a little bit of like, people don't quite understand what's happening, and there's those who deny it as well, or are in denial, and But I get you. There's definitely a lack of consistency in tone in what's and Minnie Driver is the worst offender of this, of like, whatever. Like, she has a line. Do you remember that one where I think it's almost like she's responding to her memory of his memoir.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
He says something, and then her response is whatever. It's just like one word. She's just like but she's like in the middle of this, tragedy.
Right. That is a good point. The surrealness of that versus Richard Attenborough's very sort of serious
Yeah.
Which
I liked his performance. I mean,
his performance is great. Actually, it's very consistent with the character,
and
it's just hers has nothing to do with her environment. So it is so strange. What a, I mean, I don't blame it on her. I just think she had to have been terribly badly directed.
Yeah, no. Oh, no, I don't. Obviously, we know she's good. We know we've had plenty of examples. I think she had no context for what she was doing.
The only time she gives a line reading with any emotion is when she's like, "No, I'm here. I'm at the, I'm on the island." They're like, "We get that a lot," and she's like, "No, I'm really here." It's very funny. Anyway, I don't think we've mentioned it. We've been talking for almost 6 minutes about Trespasser. So it's through a glass darkly rather, a version of a podcast as well, where we don't tell you the game for a while, as if you couldn't guess. But no,
they could not guess. If somebody was listening to this episode, now, right? They would not be able to guess what the hell we're talking about.
What are you talking about?
Minnie Driver, what?
Yeah, in a video game? It's weird.
I mean, it's lost to time, like the island, right? Game is lost to time. It's just a weird. Yeah, I mean, I think
the movies are actually on Amazon Prime right now, and I have to say I'm not tempted to watch them.
You're not?
No, because of this. This experience has turned me off on dinosaurs. I'm like, I guess the dinosaurs were real.
I actually was because of Attenborough's performance and the writing of his, because it's almost, I mean, it's very fanficky in a way, but also it's a bit of a transmedia kind of, that one aspect, only that one thing in this game. There's a little bit of like, you get some extra perspective from him, right? And it did make me nostalgic for the first movie, at least, right? Because he talks about, I mean, it's inner monologue essentially, right? That you get from him that you didn't get from the film, because he does obviously outwardly talk a lot about the importance of what they're doing and how big it's going to be, and he equates it to something in the game at some point. He says what we're doing is the equivalent of the atom bomb, maybe, or something.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Yeah, which is like, okay, good. Yeah, I get you. But I mean, will I execute on watching them? But I wasn't. Yeah, especially for the first one, because it is. I do think the first movie, they did a good job at that. The gravity of it.
It's a great movie. I've seen it several times. I was doing a bit.
That's right. Exactly right. Trespasser, so bad it makes you not want to watch Jurassic Park at all. I mean, I'll make to your point about looking at. I think the Funhouse mirror is a good funny one as well. And I mean, for better or for worse, I think I'm still really glad we played it, and I do think for me it's still an important game to play for many people.
I mean, I get it. I totally get it. I mean, it's just such a bad example of so many things. I mean, I have 3 specific gripes I want to talk about in that one level. Probably more than 3, but 3 like major ones. And, they're kind of instructive. One I've kind of already addressed, I guess. I guess no, there's actually another one. Yeah, there's a lot of issues in this section. So one is they are not consistent with their rules. So, for example, the Hammond house, which is the pink house, right? It's clear. I mean, one thing that's actually nice is like you walk into that area, it's the first building you see it and you go, oh, that's important, right? I mean, then you have to kind of go all the way into the level to like understand why it's important, right? And because you have to go all the way to that building that's clear across the level. You basically come in through this pipe and you turn right and it's like, oh, there's a house over there in its very pixelated glory. And the furthest spot from that entrance point is where you actually learn that he has the master key card. And the key card that you need, I guess, is the purple one. That gate is also right there. So you kind of like with the exception of the security building where you have to get the information to stitch this all together, you do kind of visually have everything you need to know in some ways. So that wasn't terrible. It took me a while to kind of piece it together because there's dinosaurs. I don't know if you know that, but there's some dinosaurs in this game. So often you're a little distracted by the dinosaurs.
They don't care about key cards.
Exactly. In retrospect, I was like, oh, okay. So there, you go there, you get the environmental storytelling with the weird public notice board. But you do learn some information from that, which is like, this person has the key to Hammond's house. He's supposed to return it. So you're like, oh, okay, I have to go there to get that key.
I think I know where this is going.
Well, I thought I'd just be clever. I'll just build a stack. I have to build a stack of crates to get into that guy's house. So why don't I just use them to get over the wall to get where I want to go, which is Hammond's house.
Oh, that's not how I got to Wu's house.
Okay. Well, we can talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
If I can jump over,
cool.
if I can jump over the wall to get into Wu's house, I should be able to jump over the wall to get into Hammond's house.
Totally, yeah.
And there's an invisible blocking wall because, of course,
no!
I built it. I got up there, and it just is blocked. And I'm like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah,
I mean, I'm there like, what?
They flew too close to the sun.
Doing, yeah. I mean. It's not. There's not a lot that has to be done there. Like some barbed wire that slants out, like you would put on anything that you're not supposed to enter.
Yeah, that sounds like a last minute bug fix, right?
All it needs, it's all it needs to communicate to me. Oh yeah, you can't do this. Like that's a very simple.
Did I mention the game needed another year?
Oh my god, at least. But it was just it was like
good for you for going for it though. Yeah, but
to do all the work to move those crates from behind the church to put them there. I mean, by this point, I had killed all the dinosaurs. I had all this time. I'm like, well, okay, I actually got really good at moving the crates. You pick up the crate, then you kind of tilt back and you raise your head up. So now the crate is up in the air and you're just walking with it held over your head. Because there was a while where there were two velociraptors I hadn't killed, and I was just keeping an eye on them. And so having the box over my head was my way to be able to see them all the time. Then eventually I was like, I should just kill these guys. Eventually they're going to get me and I'm going to be annoyed. Because I was trying not to save all the time for another reason, which we'll get to later. I should just say it now because I'll forget. Did you know that in order to tell you what your save names were, they would have to open every save file?
Wait, what? I don't know if I'm following.
So if you save the game, you get to name your save.
Yeah.
So, and then when you open that save dialog, there's a list of all your prior saves.
Yeah.
So the more saves you have, the longer it takes to open that dialog box. So at a certain point, I'm like, man, this is really weird. It's now taking several seconds to open this dialog box. Like 5 seconds, 6 seconds. And so I quit the game, and I go into that folder, and there's, 50 save files. I take all 50. I take all, the first 49 or whatever, and put it in a new subfolder, like in case it breaks, if I don't have them. I put them in a subfolder, a new folder. And they're all right in the base folder of the game, besides not a subfolder called saves or anything like that. They're all right there along with the executable, which is great because the executable name starts with T. All the save games start with S. So you have to scroll down through a billion S files before you get to your T file. It's amazing. You open that and then the next time open the dialog, instantaneous. One file to read. So when they made their save system, they didn't thread it, which, okay, 1998, I get it. And probably one of those things you don't want to do. But they didn't do any cache. I mean, just all the things, maybe they only ever had one save, two saves, whatever, discs are smaller than I have no idea. But I just was like, at every possible point that there was weird friction with this game of some technical variety, I found it. So it's just amazing. Anyway, so I said that just because I would forget to come back to it. All right, so then I repiled the boxes in front of Wu's house and went in, did all that stuff, did all that. The next thing was, you had told me I would probably try to get up those stairs twice. because I didn't have a white key card. One thing I looked up in this game, that was this white key card.
I did too. I did look around a long time and tried a couple different things. But
I looked around in the house, and I'm like, well, where would
the other thing is they also have the cattle prod there, the dino prod, which I thought would have been an inspired puzzle choice if you could actually electrocute. Because I think it's the first time you find
I tried to do that. Yeah,
I did too. Yeah, I thought, oh, brilliant! I'm gonna go zap this thing.
I also thought that was like, oh, that's not bad. Use this. I mean, first I knocked it out the window, had to reload a save, but after I actually managed to pick it up,
I did that like 5 times.
Oh my god! I did learn that you can basically jump up the stairs. You don't actually need to pile boxes.
Oh, really? Oh, yes, from the broken stairs?
From the left side of the stairs to the right side of the stairs. If you just nail it exactly right, you can just get up the stairs.
That makes sense. Okay. I was going to use that puzzle for an example to explain something about the game that was also revelatory for me at the time, but continue.
Okay, and so the key was just behind a random rock in the backyard, which again, what are you doing? Like that, there was no, that would be it. That would be a thing, I guess, to have some environmental storytelling about. I can't really justify it in any way why this key card would be in the backyard. There's nothing that supports it. So it's just like, that is like the worst hunt the pixel design I've ever heard. Okay, so that was terrible. And then the final thing was there's a hidden compartment in the library, which I saw that there was a space behind the door. I was like, man, they can't even align. I mean, all the plants are misaligned. Why wouldn't a bookshelf be misaligned? So there was a clue there that this was a thing that you could push on.
That was counter to the rest of the game.
That was not just a bug.
Misalignment is not usually a visual language.
Exactly. So I ignored it for a long time. And then at a certain point, at this point, I think I'd finally looked up where this key card is. I came back into that room and I went around and I was like, wait a minute. That bathroom is not big enough to take up that space. And of course, knowing, the preciousness of space in video games, circa 1998, I was like, oh, that's actually a thing. That's actually a thing there. And I went back and pushed. I think there was a disc in there or something.
Yeah, it's not critical path, but it is.
At that point I had a gun and a white key card that I had holstered the white key card. I'd rather lose the gun at this point than the key card. I had the disc and I threw it up onto the stairs, but I didn't quite throw it far enough. So the next time I saved before coming down the stairs to try to get it, and I crouched to pick it up and I fell off the stairs. I was like, nope, I don't care about that. I no longer want to know. So I did not find what was on that disc.
Well, it's a weird, I don't know, I guess it's not an Easter egg, but it's like a weird side thing that, because, up in his office, once you go,
there's a computer in there. I figured
a computer and a disk drive. Yeah, like a 5 1/4 or something, or maybe it's a 3 1/2. But
that's
anyway, 3 1/2. And so, it's basically like a very problematic personal part of his memoir that didn't make it in, about him kind of like ogling a woman. It's really distasteful. Yeah, I mean, it's not. It's a Richard Attenborough version of that. Like, he became attracted to somebody. I remember the
sort of like Jimmy Carter sinning in his heart or whatever.
I don't know. Yeah, it was bad, and so and ultimately, useless. But the weirdest part of it is that, of course, the disk drive does not actually have any mechanism to get the disc in there. So as far, and I did get the secret, pages of the memoir to play the audio file. It was an audio file like the rest of them. But as far as I can tell, the way you do that is you hold the disc and you kind of rub it on the disk drive.
Wow, that's very salacious.
You kind of just, because, when you hold the disc, it's like you're holding it with your palm straight up. And then she's kind of like, it's just like, it's not like holding it like the key card, which is like, the thumb and your index finger, between your thumb and your index finger. It's like she holds it like with her four. I don't know why she.
Oh, right. It's like
a box, right? She holds it like a box rather than a key card.
Right.
The disc, and so you're kind of like just like
kind
slapping it, flapping it onto the disk drive, and then eventually the audio plays for that disc.
Wow, that is
so. I mean, if the white key card had been in there, that would have been much better, you know.
Yeah. I mean, if the green disc had been in the backyard, I would have been like, okay, I can see that. He got annoyed and he threw it out the window. Like, that makes some sense.
Yeah. Well, so
he's the like, nobody should ever hear this. He throws it out the back window, thinking the elements will destroy it. You know,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Or he's drinking his scotch. Like, you leave a bottle of scotch on the desk. And he does it out of cupidity, you know, or whatever. He's mad at himself. He throws it out the window. You can sort of see the environmental storytelling, you know, writes itself. But instead,
but instead they did the opposite.
Path, random
all
thing.
Of those things. Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, it's so there is a key card for Wu's door that you can find.
Oh, there is.
Yeah, but you have to turn the power on first, I believe. Or no, maybe
the power is the gray later, right? That's
no, you have to turn the power. Well, so I forget the exact order, but there's the data. There's 4 buttons in the control in the main building.
That's security
building, but they call it something else. I forget what they call it.
Oh, okay.
It's actually modeled after the visitor center in the movie.
I think they call it the visitor center then.
Yeah, they might. Yeah. But there's 4 buttons there. One is the network. You have to turn that on because that connects everything. You have the power you turn on. And I forget what it is, but I think and I actually missed it because I went all the way there and then I went all the way back and realized I forgot to press a button. And one of the buttons is not broken for each of the doors. And it's Wu's. So what you do is you turn the power on, turn everything on, and then you press the button A, and it basically unlocks his door for you.
I don't think I pushed any buttons in that building.
Okay, well then, that control panel. Well, did you see the control panel? Maybe you never saw it.
I'm not sure I even saw the control panel.
Okay, because I think also
I used the climbing up the boxes to get over Wu's wall.
So you skipped that whole section, basically.
I went there and I got guns. I mean, there was like an animal control room.
There's also a blue. Guns. I think there's a key card in there. There's a blue key card in there, but I don't remember what it goes to. And there's the one key card you get in the church. Did you get that one? Yeah. Well, I mean, long as it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. There's a key card you get in there's sort of a
church
cabin.
Get you into the
cabin-looking building that can,
or maybe it's a cabin
that you can jump up to the second floor, and then there's like a balcony all around it with these round tables. That was a pain to get up to the second floor on that one as well. I think that's where the key card was that you're talking about.
There's one that gets you into the visitor center, right?
Right.
Or the control room of the visitor center.
Maybe that's it. Maybe at that point. Yeah, I don't remember the sequence of those things because it was I spent a lot of time in this level.
No, I did too. But the interesting thing, I mean, regardless of what you actually did, the important part of the story for me is that you didn't do it the way I did it.
Right.
And yes, there's a lot to criticize. There's a lot of bad choices made, but the reason that I love this game is because, as I've said before, is because of the potential, right? Like these glimmers of, oh, wait a second. Now, it is definitely a bummer that you couldn't get over Hammond's wall, but the fact that you could get over Wu's wall is really cool to me because you basically skipped all of the control panel stuff. You skipped 1 or 2 key cards, and you just jumped straight to the chase. And that the fact that you could do that, that's the early. Yeah, I'll get to it into my takeaways, but I mean there's some there's some magic in the alternate universe where it's Bizarro, right? It's like Superman and Bizarro. This is like the Bizarro version of
this is Mxyzptlk,
Yeah, exactly. And I'll remake the point that I was talking about in pre-show, but we talked about this a little bit for those who haven't listened to it, maybe check it out. If you have, you probably will remember when we played Populous, and I won't dwell on this too long, but just to repeat myself from pre-show, when we played Populous, we talked a little bit, I believe, about the concept of how populace exists and civilization exists in the same world, our world, Earth.
Yeah, in the same year, basically.
In the same, right. And so there's the interesting thing that I didn't anticipate about doing this podcast is seeing through that lens, right? The timing of how things, especially in this era, the 90s, 80s and 90s, when these genres were not well defined and people were still very much experimenting. I mean, it goes back 70s, goes back earlier, but the genres were not well defined enough. So when somebody like a Molyneux or a Sid Meier were experimenting, they were going in different directions, like away from each other on how to make, how to make a strategic sim of some kind or strategic gameplay one, and so to your point, which I love about the Funhouse, Mirror, Bizarro, whatever example we want to use, that's what I love about this game too. That and I, accidentally in my takeaways, I think I talk about a similar thing that I'll get to then, but just that it's they're for me when I played the game back then, and the reason it stuck with me this whole time is they were shining a light on something that. And yes, we talk about it with immersive sims now, and it's been well-trod territory and well-defined territory at this point. But they're shining a light on something that, for whatever reason, because I had played Ultima Underworld before this, as an example, they were shining a light on something that I didn't know I wanted, and the fact that, and I actually had a thought when I was in that section that I should try to get over the wall somehow, and I wish I would have actually... at least Wu's wall. I wish I would have actually tried to do that because it would have been an even better revelation. But really quick, while I have the floor, to talk about that staircase puzzle or whatever you want to call it, the staircase obstacle.
Yes.
The one thing I wanted to mention
is a better word for most of the problems in this game.
Yeah, they're just a stop along the way. The small point I wanted to make there is that. Also playing this game back then that I remember back then, but also did again this time, is this concept that I think Half-Life 2 did a better job of course, and elevated even further, is I come upon a situation like that, and they have pre-set up objects, right? Like, okay, right. I see the broken stairs. Okay, I see they stacked 3 boxes to make stairs. Of course, I need to jump up these and get up there. That's they're trying to sort of teach me the concept.
And it's critical later.
It's critical later. It's critical.
Well, it's critical there.
Critical now as well.
It's not really, because you can.
Oh, because you can jump. Yeah, which jump it, probably not planned.
Right. It's very difficult to do, but it was actually way easier than stacking the staircase.
Yeah. Well, because I think I spent at least an hour on that staircase because I
started doing it and I was like, again. I don't know. It looks like I can make that jump.
Yeah. Which is cool. I think that's a good thing, right? Because they give you wiggle, they give you some slop in there.
I honestly suspect there was like some, we talked last time about how the restoring forces, that was another word that I wasn't coming up with last week.
Well, that sounds fancy.
Well, the restoring force is what pushes you out, right? It pushes you out when you.
I had the restoring forces happen with 3 shotguns toward the end of the game.
Yeah,
I think.
Well, I think I got restoring forced a little bit up onto the stair, like you were sort of like glancing off one of the because the boxes were pretty high. You just didn't have a way to get up to the highest boxes that they had pre-stacked for you. So I feel like I jumped to a point and it sort of bounced up onto the step.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it happens. Yeah, you can definitely finagle that in many places.
And I also saw a lot of the bounciness that you talked about when you're in the physics world. Oh man.
Yeah, you're not really ever feeling like your feet are really landing on a box, right? You're always like, whoa.
Yeah, bouncing.
And so my point there is really just as soon as I got to that part, and I tried it a couple times as they had set it up and probably accidentally knocked over the top box anyway, so I had to start all over. The thing that I love about the game in many of those places is, and again, early kernels of these ideas that are done much better later, but still I think they're trailblazing, is like I come upon them and I immediately deconstruct what they put, and I think of my own version of that. So for me, getting up the stairs ended up being a different box configuration entirely. I moved everything, like, you know what I mean? So because it was in my power to do so, you know, versus like, oh, I have to do it exactly where they, rather than reloading and trying to do the jump that they had set up, you know?
Yeah.
I reloaded and just reconfigured everything the way that, and made it way more efficient and easier to get up ultimately than.
I mean, I started that way. I brought in a lot of boxes that I had used to get into woos, hoping that I wouldn't have to go back there. But after a while, I'm like, man, this is a drag. You have to go out the door and then go all the way around the house to get in the back, and then go around through the library to get to the front again. That's after I did 2 boxes, I was like, I'm not doing that again. Let me see if I can make this jump.
Yeah. Which so is,
you know.
I think the town is it is, I think, a little bit at the heart of the game because so many of those elements happen in that one place. Yeah, it's interesting. And it's, you know, it's just different than open terrain and stuff. And the key cards are like ham-fistedly thrown in there and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah, I mean, there's, you know, that's definitely Doom was red, yellow, and blue keys, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of fine. You know, I didn't really mind the key cards. You know, I thought it was appropriate that Hammond had his own key, although why wouldn't that be on his lanyard, you know, when he left? Like, stuff like that where I'm just like, well, why is that in his office that is locked with another key that's in his backyard that is locked by his front door, which is in his neighbor's house, which is apparently locked by our power console clear across the compound? It's just like the chain of events is so contrived that it's, you know, but you see, like, okay, they're trying to make this logical chain of puzzle where you're like, well, introduce, you know, a complication. It's just so many of the complications are really the same complication. I have to open this door. They needed more.
They only have so many. Keys. Yeah, they only have so many tools they can use in their toolbox.
You know,
but
another thing.
But the thing is you missed the whole power thing because you didn't even get to the. You know, you just skipped that whole.
I just skipped that
control panel thing, and
yeah,
they were trying because the reason you couldn't get into the door of Woos is because the power was down and it was broken. Yeah,
you're right. I saw that. I could tell that it was broken, and I'm like, oh well, then I must just have to go over it.
Yeah, that's logical. Yeah, that's really
because it was visually clear, you know, that it was damaged somehow. You know, with they spent a large portion of their texture budget, I guess, making that scratched up enough that you could tell it was broken. It was very strange. What a strange game. You know, the other thing too is I felt like, okay, now that you're saying this, like the power's off, because for a while I kind of like when I went all the way back to that end of the level with that visitor center building, I was like, oh, I must have to get through this fence. Because there's an electric fence behind there. And that's a big thing in the movie, right? They climb over the fence and the fence turns on as they just finish climbing over the other side, right? It's like lighting up and I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I'm going to have to get through this thing. So it's just like, they're also like, they have this license and then they're not.
Missed opportunities.
Yeah, they're just like not leaning on those things. There's just a lot of stuff like that. I will say.
You go into the pens later, the paddocks later.
Right, you do. Yeah. I was going to talk about that level because I actually liked the Cray puzzle because it was just straightforward.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you go in, there's some stuff on the wall that's sort of like, oh, you do Roy G. Biv. Of course, they're blue and they're indigo in the actual lights are not very distinct. But I actually don't think it matters which order I had to do it twice because I had saved basically before I did all of that. And then I crashed, I think in the paddocks or something. Like I got into the paddock and it just crashed. So I had to basically redo that whole area. So I liked the Cray thing. I was like, cool, you got to figure out how to boot this thing. And they had like different, you know, boot up screens which was like, oh, okay, that, you know, I kind of understand what's going on. Although just having the InGen logo be up when you've finished, not quite enough. You know, I was like, is there more I got to do? Like, is there a panel somewhere else that I got to figure things out? But no, it took me a while to figure out that one of the paddocks was open. So that was that. But the thing outside that is like, but then you have this other thing where you have to like move back and forth like a robot with your finger extended to type in on the keypad this 526327, which I'll never forget because I had to try it many, many times. And then I crashed and I had to try it many, many times again with the extending finger that comes out. Oh my God. Yeah.
Not just the extending.
Your name may have been cursed at a certain point the second time I was doing it.
Yeah, because you hadn't gotten to a number pad, I think.
There was a number pad to get into the city compound.
It is optional though, right?
But yes, and it was also like BIGLIE, and I was looking at that. I was like, are all of these letters? Are some of these numbers? And then I tried to enter something on the keypad, and I was like, all right, you got to be kidding me. There was another one, I think, maybe in the warehouse area.
Yeah, you're right. I think there is one there too.
I think there might be one there. And this is right after that. Oh yeah, to get into the warehouse area at all, there's a bus. There's a bus, and then on the back of the sign, there's a number 1808 that you have to enter into the keypad there. So that also painful, much more painful because, of course, whenever you make a mistake, and which is normally just because you're pushing up against the thing, it will it'll enter a button multiple times. Yeah. And you're like, okay, well now I have to cancel it out. But then you're hitting the button a bunch of times. And it's like, oh no, did I hit the button 3 times or 2? So did I reset it or not? And so you'll try to do it again. And then you'll like hit 5 buttons. You're like, oh my God, now how many times do I have to hit the thing before it'll reset? Oh,
when your sausage fingers just kind of like
they brush against 6 numbers.
Brush over the numbers because you didn't get the distance right. I mean, in real life, when you have a keypad, you do have to stand at a certain distance, and you have to put your hand up. You have to point your finger. You have to have some dexterity in pressing those buttons, and you learn that over. I mean, you're 100.
I have like 15 degrees of freedom just in the bendable parts of my fingers. Never mind that my wrist moves and turns. I don't have one sausage I stick out that doesn't bend.
I know. It's so
flops around. I felt like, did you say everything everywhere all at once?
I did, yeah.
I felt like the sausage fingers.
Section. I think you're supposed to, yeah. Again, it's very.
I don't think you're supposed to.
Well, no, you're not supposed to. No, you're right. It's just. It's the. I mean, I've said it before in the previous episodes, but it's the.
I went up to the pad. And
I applaud them for trying kind of approach, right? Of like, what if
they were 100% committed to the bit? I did I went up and I started typing numbers and nothing happened. And I was like, oh no, I could not believe that I was going to have to push these buttons.
One not to jump to the end, and I actually wasn't planning on bringing this up, but one thing I noticed in the credits that I've forgotten about, both Spielberg and his son are
Max Spielberg
credited as designers on the game. So I would really be interested to know what that means exactly. Of course, we know the immersive sim background of some of these folks and some of their goals, but I would be interested to know if there was any translation kind of challenges with that kind of stuff when you have somebody coming in with, some sort of highfalutin ideas about how something should work.
Yeah, I don't have a sense of how old Max Spielberg would have been at the time, because I didn't know, I know nothing about Spielberg's personal life.
Yeah, I don't know either. No.
So I don't know. So that was 25 years ago. This game. It's not super easy to. Let's see. He was born. Oh, he was 13 at the time this game came out.
Perfect.
Yeah. Having once been approached by, this would have been in my Bethesda era, by a friend of one of my sons who had a game design document, which was a bunch of, he wanted me to sign an NDA.
Okay. Yeah. Well, good for him.
This kid was like 12. He basically had a Call of Duty, knockoff idea. And I was like, I absolutely think you should make this game. Here are some ideas for the tool sets you could use. They're like, no, we want you to make the game, but it's our idea, so we get the money. I said, I think it would actually be really instructive for you to try to make this game. Because I have a job. But it was. I don't think it was made, but it's hard to say. It's curious. I actually didn't hate the that sort of area either with the warehouses. I mean, it took me a while to connect that the Atlantic was what was written on the side of the crates. But there's more than one too, I think, that say that. So that's like, okay. I assumed it would be the boat, and this was what I initially thought was like, oh, he threw it in the ocean because in fact we're on an island, which I think is supposed to be in the Atlantic, right? In the movies. Actually, I don't know that.
Yeah, I think that's. No, I think so. Yeah.
I think it's off the eastern coast of whatever, Costa Rica or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
So I didn't have that part.
Which I thought was it was a clever, combination
or Honduras
of thought process used there. Yeah. And you think like a level designer, you see the one that's tilted up and you're like, well, clearly I have to get over there, but that's the one. But
it's a little hard to see that it's open. So but eventually I made my way there. But the thing that was really, really funny to me is just how easy it is to knock over the
a building.
There's a temporary building. Yeah, there's like a porta building there, which it's super easy to knock off its stilts, but then completely immovable for me. Like it's like, so I can't use that in any way. I used just I made another block staircase. That was one where I saved each time.
Oh, I did use that thing. I don't remember how I used it, but I knocked it over and then it helped me somehow.
It got knocked over towards me by a dinosaur.
Oh, I knocked it over the other direction then by a dinosaur.
A velociraptor walked into it. It fell over.
There's some ancient temple walls later that are just standing upright
that you just go near and they fall over. Yeah.
Yeah, but I had a raptor get crushed. By one.
Oh yeah, I saw one get crushed that way too. Yeah. It went up. It must have nosed against the bottom and it tilted back towards it. Oh my god, yeah. I thought it was really funny to be in those ruins and like start going up a staircase that has stood for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. Well, over 1,000 years. And then just have like the faces start, these carved faces fall off the wall and start tumbling at you.
So they were trying. They were trying to Indiana Jones it. I don't know if you noticed. Maybe you did, but there were pressure plates on the floor.
Oh, I did not notice that.
You were standing on to trigger, and also when those walls that would fall over next to the staircases, those ones that would crush you sometimes.
There were pressure plates for those too?
Those were exactly. Yep. They're subtle. They're on the ground and they're just a texture. They're not actually geometry, but okay. Yeah, I mean it's
I did not notice that. I just set them all off and just got out of the way.
Yeah. It's the unforgiving death traps situation,
Wow.
Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider.
I feel worse about that in some ways and better in some ways. I'm really conflicted about that whole section now.
Yeah.
The fact that I didn't cotton on to there being pressure plates after setting off like 8 of them is disturbing to me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no, there should have been a click or something. And but I mean, again, it's like, it's like this game is like playing a prototype, right? It's like playing something mid-development, and it'll come back in my
I mean, that's a fair point to mention, and to mention to the audience in particular. Like when we say that games are not what you see, like they're so bad for so long, this is what we're talking about, right? This, I mean, that the game is just broken, and you're like squinting as a developer and going, yeah, but I see what it could be.
all games have this happen.
They're all this at some point. I mean, they're less this than they used to be, but certainly in the era, you know, some of the games we played from the era, you know, Tomb Raider, I feel is, you know, has some of this jankiness at times. It's not this far, but it's another game that I think of as like, oh yeah, you can sort of see like this is as far as you could take it, but like how broken this would have been for so long while they were figuring out that game. This is just a game that had to ship while it was still this broken. Now, I don't think a year would have done it.
No, I mean that's I think that's what the quote is, but yeah, it would have. There's some fundamental challenges, right?
I think whoever made the decision to pull the plug probably made the right financial decision, because I'm sure it was, you know, the expense of doing more. It's remarkable that we ever got to see it, and in these days we would not. I think is the other point I would make. You know, if you got however long they were into this game, let's say they were a year and a half in or something like that. So, and they had a year to go. So they were 60% through. If a game were at this state at 60% through in modern development, it would get canceled. 100% of the time. I mean, it probably got canceled sooner. But so there's that too. It's just,
I think as soon as somebody with a decision making hat on, picked up a gun, they would have canceled it.
Yeah, they was. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, are you sure? I don't think this is the thing. You know, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to like.
Maybe they locked themselves in earlier though because they had the voice work, right? And they had spent all that money, and they're like,
well, they also made that deal with AMD, yeah. So there were certain contractual obligations. That's what I think. It sounds like that's the sort of the. Yeah, the history of it. And I don't want to, you know, this game is easy to bag on, but I want to be careful in that we especially as developers, right? As Brett was just saying, like games go through this phase. A lot of them do, and most of them do, and it is a very challenging.
I mean, they go in and out of these phases, even worse, right? I mean, there have been times when I have, you know, I can remember we were like 8 weeks or something from like our drop dead. We have to release it to, you know, whoever the console manufacturers for Skyrim. And I had found a quest breaking bug, and I had Todd Howard in my office, and I said, I'm trying to do this thing. I think this is what you're supposed to do. And he came in and he fiddled with it, and they just dropped the controller on my desk and he said, it's broken. And I was like, okay, it's just games, man. It's just like, you know, It's just like, oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll just tell QA to try to figure out how this is broken. He's like, yeah, this is just broken. It was like a major, like one of the big quest lines. And I was like,
critical path.
Yeah, it wasn't critical path, but it was important. And it was like, I don't know, you know, like there are guild quests and things like that. It was like one of those. And it was just, if you got to this point, it's broken. I mean, who knows? I had a save that I had going for probably months at that point. So, you know, it could have been that thing had actually changed over time. And maybe I had a development build broken thing, but it was still just like, just feeling that I felt that with the game you and I are working on. Like there'll be a day where I just put it down. I'm like, oh my God, freaking video games.
When you smash so many things together, sometimes it's like, and I think this game, especially in its era, is very much that, like, it's not a kitchen sink problem necessarily, because they definitely were pretty pure with what they were trying to do. Whether they should have tried to do it or not is another story. But so they stayed true to it, but they definitely were smashing things together. No pun intended on the physics, but you know, in a way that you're like, yeah, I can see how this got to where it got to.
Yeah,
because they set goals like procedural animations, like physics running everything, you know, like all these sorts of goals that when they collide eventually, you know, it's hard to unravel that stuff. But all that being said, I still believe this to be an important step in the industry's history. And I'm glad we played it.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I see what you see in it. I didn't enjoy the experience most of the time, but I do see it. Like I do understand. It'd be like if I heard, you know, like I said, Velvet Underground, I just hated the music. Like, I don't know Velvet Underground, but I would be, you know, I could probably at the same time hear it and go, okay, I see why people glommed onto that because of what came later. Like same thing here. So I don't disagree with that at all. It just,
and unfortunately, I think like
frustrating at times to play.
Toward the end of the game, like the last, the ascent up the mountain and the last couple, I guess we'll call them obstacles from here on out. It's also was a little bit of, you could see the history of development in that they were finally getting,
better at it.
They were getting better at what is special about the game, specifically the elevator puzzle, where you had to lower the elevator at the end of the ascent and then, shoot or throw a rock at that one thing to knock it onto the other. Just perfectly placed switch.
Yeah. Well, a couple things with that one. This was very funny. One is the first time I did shoot at it careened off in some random direction, right? So it didn't fall onto it. So I'm like, okay, I'm not doing it right. So I looked around to see what else I had at my disposal, and there was like a hand bone on the ground.
Oh, yes.
So I tried to rest the hand bone on the machine so that if I hit the board, it would push the hand bone. I was like, I'm trying to use some dead body to activate this switch.
That's amazing.
And I couldn't make it. I couldn't put it on there without it activating. So like the elevator would start going away at that point with my gun. So I was like, okay, well, this is not what to do. So I just ended up kind of rolling back and being like, okay, maybe I did the right thing. I just didn't do it well, or I didn't hit the thing right. I think I hit it in a corner or something because of the guns. You can't point, and so it like spiraled away, which, physically realistic, I guess. And it just didn't do the thing. And then I did it again.
I mean, that's a cool example of the challenges as well, but I think it's hilarious. Like the hand bone thing is pure gold in my mind, because that is a very, I think, cut and dry example of like navigation puzzles, like getting up the stairs or at the end of the game when you're just getting to the helipad are different. This one I think is interesting in that all you're really trying to do is get a switch to trigger.
You're right.
And because of the way that they built the game, there are hundreds of ways that you could have done that.
Yeah.
And they set one up that is generally easy to do unless you do what you did.
Right.
But if you decided not to reload, you could have done all sorts of weird things, right? To get that, to have something fall on top of that switch. It would be interesting to see, to experiment, to see.
Yeah, you could pick up. Well, I could have gone and picked up that board and put it back where it was. Maybe. Using the rotate hand button.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah.
I mean, anytime I knocked a physics thing out of place and it didn't do the thing that I wanted, I reloaded. Because I was like, that probably could have gone better. Like,
yeah.
It was like literally every time I was like, okay, there's probably a better way to do this. It didn't happen. They were, like you said, they were getting better at this. So there are some like cantilevered boards and planes of different kinds, metal pieces or whatever, they're sticking out over cliffs that you just have to get something on top of so they'll tilt so you can walk up them. And that's like, oh, okay, I'm not good at the throwing, but I just need to put it on top of that and it'll come down. So I should have, I kind of at that point had been like, okay, most of the physics stuff is actually set up to be pretty straightforward if you just kind of see the world a particular way. And then you got to kind of do the minimal execution, and it's just that all of the minimal execution is hard, because the physics is so sensitive, and quote unquote accurate. It's not really, it's a lot of ideal volumes, like we've talked about before. Like a real board would not spin off like that. Well, a real board would blast apart if you hit it with a shotgun like I did, right? So there's that too. But
this game is a literal representation of shaking the Jell-O. It's like I feel like they like set.
You have to explain what that means,
or maybe you do. But they set up these physics puzzles, and they knew how fragile things were as well. And they're like, okay. And then, they put this box here, and then they lean this board here, and then they put the switch, and then they just slowly back away.
Yeah.
Let's just hope that they can do it because we don't want to touch it.
There's some physics stuff like that in Fallout 3. I remember too, where
I'm sure
because of the way the physics would settle when you would load into an area, sometimes things would topple and move and like interpenetrate and like spin out of control and things like that. Physics is was still whatever that is 15 years ago was still a pain in the neck to work with at times. I'm sure in some ways it probably still is. There's still cases where you're like, man, we actually had one. If we had one where if the collision on something you were carrying wasn't turned off properly, you could like jump and it would trigger that you would jump onto that thing. Your collider would collide with this thing you were carrying and you'd shoot off into space. I don't remember if you remember that bug. Anyway, shaking the Jell-O.
Yeah.
So we use that phrase to mean there's a point at which you're like, we want to get this thing to be stable. But video games are Jell-O. If you touch them, they jiggle. You do anything. So we try to like touch as little as possible so that the Jell-O can settle. That is not our phrase. That is a former interviewee on the cast. So it's
who were you? My first memory of that was from Hal Barwood. Who were you referencing? I forget.
Our former CPO.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Interesting.
Maybe that's where it came from. Maybe it was.
I don't remember
passed around like a Jell-O mold.
Exactly. There was a lot of There was a lot of speculation, I think, about, and also it probably was. Yeah, it was sort of through osmosis that all of us. Yeah, but I remember Hal being the first one that I don't think he told it exactly like that, but that's how we use it. Yeah. The Jell-O. We talk about it almost every sprint.
We do. We're talking about it now. We're trying to lock down the year. Let's see. I think the last thing I want to mention is some of the I started understanding at this point. You have to understand the dinosaur behaviors pretty well, because there are places. There was a place where I think it was a T-Rex, and I got onto this pyramid or ziggurat or something. And it was down at the bottom. And I knocked a rock off on to try to kill it. That rock did not kill it.
Yeah.
So it was just hanging out down there, annoyed and bleeding. And so what I ended up having to do was kite it around on the other side from the bottom, and then run around the pyramid and go up the ascent, which was like, but it was weird. And it was like, well, no animal would actually behave that way. But there was something there of like, I'm understanding and reading the behaviors, which I appreciate.
Just constraint. Yeah, again, I think we said this last episode. If you just ignore that they're dinosaurs and that you're in a Jurassic Park game and just let the rules be the rules, there's something really weird and interesting about like, okay. And like for me, that was luring raptors not to their death, just off of the side of the cliff as you ascend the mountain.
Take forever
just
to
like,
climb.
I would take forever to climb, but I'd be like, you know what? I'm not going to waste ammo on you. I'm just going to trick you into falling off of this cliff. And then they just kind of do their weird, like knee bending slide, like down.
They probably took damage when they came over that cliff face, and like now they're extra bendy.
They're also that's true. They probably did. None of them ever died, but I collected like 10 raptors at the bottom of this mountain, and they just kind of kept jiggling their knees down. So poor raptors.
Yeah.
I don't think raptors would be good mountain climbers in real life either, but I don't think
but they wouldn't be up there.
Why
are they up? There's no prey. Like, why are they up there? Just, which brings me to the final moments. I already mentioned the phone call she makes on the radio and how weird surreal that is. It's like the most dialogue it's the only dialogue really you get in the game, except for her saying whatever, I guess that one time, which is also strange because
whatever.
Who is she responding to? Like
herself.
It makes me question the whole Like, is she hearing this? Like, does she have a book on tape that she's listening to while she's going around? Anyway, like, it's just to recontextualize the whole cosmology of the game. But you get up to the very top, and I was genuinely frustrated by this because I'm like, oh, cool, I can see the way out. I have to get up on those boxes. And then I see there's
obstacle.
There's a helipad over there.
Boxes.
I need to get there. Yeah, the final obstacle. But when you get up close to those boxes, they spawn in 3 dinosaurs. Which is just, it breaks every rule they've had up to that point. And I get that they want to, in fact, I actually had a moment where one of them I think is an allosaur, and then there's 2 raptors. And actually the allosaur went after one of the velociraptors, and I was like, that's cool, except the other one killed me. So that's less cool. Like, if they had done the thing that they do in the movie where they're going after each other so you can escape, that would have been a cool moment. Instead, I did the most appropriate thing for the Trespasser game, which was I eventually figured out, I can just run back to the ramp that I climbed to get up here and get to the side of the ramp.
Well, they don't like ramps. Yeah, they
don't like ramps, and they'll come straight at me and just walk over the cliff that the ramp goes over. The gorge that is created by a metal staircase.
It's so entertaining, too, because as they hit that lip, and then... just their knees buckle, and they're just like you just get this sense, and then the physics kick in and it pulls them down, and you just get the sense they're like, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake.
It is quite comical.
Poor guys.
And then you like make a little stair out of boxes and climb up and over and fall down and take a little bit of damage and leave the island, and it's like, all of that is just the most appropriate way for this game to have ended. Jankily, except for the spawning, which I genuinely was ticked about because I'm like, I see, I'm at the end.
That's a good point. That's a pretty big rule. I mean, they were spawning him throughout. I think you just didn't see him as much.
Right, but, you don't see him, but this is like right on top of you.
But one of the cool things about the game most of the time, I take that back. I bet they didn't spawn him very often, but I think they triggered certain events. But one of the coolest things about the game for me is walking over the plains and seeing the dinosaur in the distance, right?
Yeah,
and then having that continuity. But it's a good point that they broke that rule there.
I mean, the allosaur is really big. It's not there. In fact, after it happened, I was like, how did I miss them? And it's because I had saved right going up that metal ramp, thankfully. And I'm like, well, how did I miss that? It feels like I should have been able to see it. I assumed that they were there. So I actually walked around the space. I think it's just a vertical trigger or just a plane. It would have
been fine, too. They didn't even need to spawn. They could have just had them there.
They could have just been hidden, or behind the building things that they had there. So that was just an unfortunate choice because it felt like it could have worked without that. But there's an allosaur which is taller than the buildings. And then as soon as they spawn, I look and I'm like, oh yeah, there's no way I missed that allosaur. It's like it's towering over this building. I can see it, and I was just looking at that spot a minute ago. That was and then she goes back and she returns to her answering machine. In the cutscene, which is how the game began. It's one of those full circle games that I really love, Tim. So thank you.
It's just she just went on a bit of a jaunt and returned home.
She's like, you better have a good excuse, her sister, on the radio, on the answering machine. You better have a really good excuse for why you're not answering my messages.
Yeah.
Okay. I think she does. Well, we've been dangling takeaways, so I guess we should get into them. I think my takeaways are, all of my intros. Be careful with DNA, the tiny spiral of genetic code. Make sure not to plan your string quartet recital on the evacuation day. And of course, question that if you can do a thing, whether you still should do that thing. But we can actually do the real takeaways. Sir, I will, as always, allow you to go first.
Well, I think that you're being snarky, but I think that they are the kernel of a lot of them. And my first one actually is the one you just mentioned, the last one you just mentioned, and
Yeah.
it is in theme.
It's one
on
of mine
purpose.
as well. That was the hidden real one. In them.
Which one of these is the real one? Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's obviously meta and and self-referential or what have you. But yeah, they were so worried about whether they could make a game with these goals that they got to a point where they probably realized, oh, I'm not sure we should have done this.
Right.
And and as I've said many times, and the reason I wanted to play this game at all is because despite it having lots of things to learn in the critical side from, to not do this, not do that, what not to do, I still love that I got to play it again, because I still applaud. I still had some of those magical moments, so despite them, despite whether they should have done it or not, I still think I'm glad that they tried. And that, just because it went so well for the people in the movie Jurassic Park, sometimes you just gotta shoot for the stars to find some of that magic. Otherwise you wouldn't have a movie franchise. So you gotta push sometimes.
I do think that part is well said. And it's sort of one of my takeaways is that, well, there's two ways to think of it. Either, having high aspirations as being a good way to, you shoot for the moon, you miss, you might hit the stars, as you're saying. That's good and to be applauded. But there's also something to be said for like not knowing if a thing's possible. A lot of the work that we do, there are times where I just say, oh yeah, well, I know we can do that. Somebody else has done that, and that's not kind of the magic of game development. I mean, it might be sometimes because you put together pieces in a way that people haven't before. And that's something actually I kind of miss from this era, is that things were getting mashed up in kind of weird ways. You were saying like genres weren't yet calcified. I think actually, some of the world cinema I really like for example, South Korea, and sort of some Asian cinema generally, like they do some really unusual mashups of genre stuff. Like there's always comedy, even in a serious, Korean film. There's always some moments of levity, that are often goofy and sometimes like feel really inappropriate that wouldn't work in a Hollywood movie, but that it's just kind of their aesthetic. And we don't do enough of that in games. We don't have enough of that anymore. I feel like at times it's like either the Uber game that has everything, or it's very narrow. There's never like these weird mixes, or not in kind of mainstream games. Anyway, but the aspirational stuff I think is really, really valuable. And, as painful at times as it was to play this, you can actually see them in the levels. Like it feels like they made the levels starting at the beginning of the game and going towards the end of the game. And you feel like they actually were getting better at it. And I'm curious to know what their next, 7 levels would have been, based on the 7 levels we played. I don't know.
Well, you can play it in Trespasser too.
Mishmash. Yeah. in on Earth 313, if I can get there.
Yeah. You got to figure out how to get there. But
give me another.
Yeah, I mean, just to come back to your point there, I just think, though people probably don't believe me and have plenty of reasons why they would refute this, I still think for some people, there's certain things that we wouldn't have if it weren't for this game, or there's some, because of the shooting for the stars, I think that some people kind of found ways to achieve the real goals that were trying to be achieved here, and succeeded in a more efficient way. So anyway, my second one, which is all three of mine actually are very much closely linked, and I guess you could even say a Funhouse mirror version of the others. But related to the first one, going all in on, it wasn't just like one concept per se, because it had various, had a few different things it was trying to do. But what I mean by that is, yes, there's some immersive sim-ness to it, and they were bringing in some of their own legacy in those goals. But I think mainly with the physics and mainly with the purity of trying to make a game built around this, and maybe it ended up being through a bunch, we don't know, but maybe it ended up being through a bunch of cuts, and maybe there were other plans, and it kind of like everything ended up just coalescing around the physics because that's what they had. So who knows whether that was a goal of like really going all in on this one general concept, to the degree where even the animations were related to how physics worked in the game, as evidenced by seeing raptors go up and down hills. But there's still something that I admire about that sort of like purity, if you will, of like, no, this is, our puzzles are going to be physics blocks. Yes, they had key cards, but you still even had to pick up the key card and brush it against the keypad, using physics. I don't know. It's just, and her arm is the best example of all of this, right? How you can pick things up, how you can rotate it, like all of those sorts of like fully immersed kind of going all in. So
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Going all in is important. I agree with that. I'm going to say my second takeaway, because I actually do think it's cool. I would have liked to see more of it, but when I did see it, it was kind of a moment where I was like, okay, that's actually really neat. And that's when the dinosaurs interact with each other. So what I would, I guess, call the dinosaur ecology.
Yeah.
I think that is a super neat idea. That, I mean, we've certainly seen it better. I mean, it's basically interacting systems of predator and prey, I don't know, vegetarian, versus, or what do we say, herbivores versus carnivores types of stuff. I did see that, two Tyrannosaurus Rex fight. I mean, it made me think of, I think it's a Ray Harryhausen stop motion fight. I mean, it made me think of that. It's from the 70s.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the original Land that Time Forgot. Yeah. But I don't know if that was Harryhausen or not. I feel like it was, but it's a classic, like, there's a fight between like a T-Rex and a Triceratops, and it's so cool, and I saw that when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and if it's not Harryhausen, it certainly reminds me of that. Well, I saw it in the early aughts when I was 5 years old.
Oh, okay.
But it's from the 70s.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know who did the special effects on it. I'll try to look that up and put it in the show notes. It looks like Harryhausen's work. It's got that kind of stop motion feel. But it's definitely, seeing those moments is like, that's what that would actually look like. I can imagine seeing that in 1998 and being like, oh, that's so cool. Because there's not a lot of that in the movie except for the ending where the velociraptors go after the T-Rex, which I'm not sure they would do. Didn't seem like the smart thing when you got a lot of much softer, more edible humans running around, but okay. But yeah, that's a whole thing. And being able to go in spaces and like see a Stegosaurus, being attacked by something else, or the T-Rex going after the Diplodocus, or I don't know. It was just cool. That is a cool thing to see. And because it's not something you're directly doing or interacting with, it's the sort of thing we don't do a lot in games, and it's actually kind of nice to see something like that. I mean, I guess there are sort of like Tycoon games, or, like the Zoo Tycoons and things like that, where I guess you maybe could do that sort of stuff. I don't know. I don't tend to play those sorts of games, but those games are like, they're deliberately about, messing with the animals. This is more like, it's just part of the environment and how the environment works, and we don't tend to do that with things like that. It happens as a result with a lot of sort of human interactions. And I guess you could have the tiger on fire in Far Cry 2 or something like that. But this sort of just like an ecology playing out that you can observe safely from afar, hiding behind a large rock, is kind of cool. And, I do appreciate that. That's an experience that most games don't give you, and I'm happy to have had it. So that is one that I like.
Yeah, I think to that, like, I didn't put this as my takeaway, but it relates to one of the things that I love about the game, but I think was maybe a limitation more than a plan, that there's a sense of solitude in the game, which I think I've said many times on other series that we've done, like Tomb Raider and stuff, where I love solitude in games. I love solitude in life. But the fact that you can witness these and almost like, because they're driven by this weird procedural animation system that they did, even like the jaw opening and closing looks weird.
Yeah.
There's this voyeurism to watching them interact that feels like you're watching a nature channel, where you're like, I'm not supposed to be here. They're doing their thing. They don't know I'm here. Like I'm a photographer on National Geographic or something. There is, because it's so like passive, right? There's no Hollywood to it. It's just these two systems being thrown together, these two entities that have a bunch of systems attached to them. And you're just kind of like watching this simulation happen. And it's very weird versus like seeing that in other games, when it does rarely happen, it's usually fairly crafted,
Right. And I was going to say that the analogy for me would be Pokemon Snap, where it's like, they're there for you to take pictures.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's constructed for you to be able to take the pictures. And even though that's meant to be an illusion of it being a safari or whatever, it's not actually. They're actually there. Like it's aware of the player in a way that dinosaurs don't feel like they are in this game in those moments.
They're just there, right? They just plop there, and they're there. They trigger, of course, when you're in range, LOD wise, but whatever the systems are going to happen is going to happen, right? Like you're not. It's just they're just letting them run.
It's sort of like in Doom, if one of the projectile throwing, like an imp or a cacodemon hits something else, that thing will now fight the thing that hit it. Like whatever did it damage last, and it's like, oh, you can just kind of watch that happen now. Is another thing that it calls to mind. Though that is, you can sort of sometimes get that to happen, but when it happened, the first time I ever saw that in Doom, a while back, I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool. Like I got to start using that to my advantage. But it wouldn't happen otherwise, because they're just kind of static, waiting for you to shoot the gun for the first time, and then everything reacts. And here it's like, if I weren't here, I can imagine all of this would still be going on, and that is super cool. So anyway, you got any more you want to throw at me?
The only one that I'll add that's a weird one, and we talked about it a little bit already, and it's maybe a little smaller one, but I think it's interesting to play this game to see something. Again, it goes with my previous ones, but to see something in midstream. I described it as a prototype earlier. That's maybe even a little too unfair of a description, but it is like, I don't know. I feel like it's a constant topic for game development of wishing. And, some, especially in indie space, some developers are actually doing a much better job these days of sharing the process with players. So players are much more exposed to how the sausage is made. But I think it's really fascinating to see something, especially with the weird history that this game has, being attached to DreamWorks, having Spielberg, attached to it and I guess involved. And then, kind of the stakes are high. They're shooting for the stars like we already talked about. And then seeing where they got to, and then having to kind of squint to see what they probably were trying to do but didn't quite achieve. But it's like this weird, it's not just the alternate dimension or the alternate timeline of this game existing when it almost shouldn't, but also just we very rarely get to see things like this. It's just a weird, time capsule is not the right word. I don't know what I'm looking for, but It's just a weird, like, cross section of something that you either don't, like you said, I think you made a good point about like how games are canceled, which a lot of people aren't privy to, for obvious reasons. That's the whole point. So, you either they're either canceled or you see them come out,
Right.
but like the in-between stuff, which there's so much time and effort and blood, sweat and tears and put into all the middle stuff that, players never see.
Yeah. Yeah. The other flip side of that is I would say there's a lot of games that have shipped, over the history of the medium that are bad, just as there are many bad movies and bad books and whatever. And, we always say, when people say, oh, that was a bad game or whatever. Well, it didn't start out that way. I mean, nobody set out to make something bad. They had a vision and they just weren't able to achieve that vision. And for whatever reason, and, time in this case, they kind of, felt like that they needed a lot more time. Clearly they did. In other cases, it just, maybe their aspirations, exceeded their grasp in some games. Maybe they just didn't, as a person who's been trying to learn to, illustrate and draw and digitally paint, it takes a long time to actually be able to do something that you look at and say, oh, actually, it's pretty good. And that's just an individual pursuit, that I'm kind of doing for my own pleasure. But, that's also true of any creative talent, and especially when you've got teams of people, there might be a million reasons why things fail and turn out bad. And I just kind of, I don't know. That's why I always say people should try to be kind. They don't have to say that the game is good. They don't have to be mean about it. And with anything, it's like, hey, I read the author's new book and I didn't really care for it. It's like, yeah, well, they were trying something and didn't work out, and we can just kind of agree, well, probably, that doesn't need to be on anybody's syllabus. We can just move on. And we don't have to excoriate them. Anyway, I guess I do feel like I have to throw in a negative lesson here. And that's you have to be consistent with your rules. You just have to be, especially, when you're trying something, because especially in something like this where it can be so frustrating to do a thing because it's so painstaking and painful to do and then have it not work. I got bit by that this time, but it felt like it could have happened at any point, and I had noticed that there were invisible walls, but they felt like they were in the terrain. I was like, okay, well, there are places where I can see I'm really not supposed to go up there. I'm just trying to go up there because I'm trying to skirt this dinosaur. I get it. You want to kind of force the confrontations and whatever. They didn't, I knew it was an unfinished game or a game that needed more work. Okay, I see, they're trying to force me into that. They couldn't rely on their physics to not let you up there. So they put in some fail safes. I get it. Lots of games have done it. Not a huge issue. But to not have that there, on the wall, or, whatever. I mean, it just was like, oh no. Like, are you kidding? I did all that work, and there's just, or even just like the miss that key card, just like, what are you doing? It just like there was, I can't imagine anybody thought that was a good idea, but they just had, I think probably that I think probably would have gotten fixed, that sort of thing. But yeah, again, maybe all of this would have been fixed, but it does point out how important it is to be consistent, because when things are consistent and, generally clear is also good. Then you can accept them and you can work with them within them. But when they're not, you feel lost, like, and that's not really what we come to games for. So I think it is, important. A lot of people will say magic systems are never very magical in games because they have all these rules. And it's like, yeah, but you need to be able to control it. Otherwise, what are you doing? Like, you're just like throwing stuff in the air and hoping something magical happens. That's not a way to achieve goals and things like that in a game. So, with games that are meant to be somewhat goal oriented and not just kind of toys, as some games have been described, you need consistency and some sort of clarity of the rules being applied. so that you don't run into those edge cases. So this was a object lesson for me of the importance of those things. It also came into play with that spawning. It was like, what? Where did that come from? Like, you threw that at me now? The exit's right there. I'm 15 feet from the exit of the game, and you just changed the rules. Like, it's not allowed. You can't do that. And these are good object lessons. Why? Right? I mean, so like you said, sometimes it's good to play noble failures because we learn things from them, and that's definitely something I thought was really nailed home for me today. I actually feel better about the falling rocks because there's a rule there. I didn't see the rule. That's a clarity problem, but it was consistent. I mean, they all fell the same way. I kind of get it. So, and maybe again, in the next 7 levels, you'd be able to find ways to use that to your advantage. Like, you could shoot the pressure plates when the dinosaur's coming after you. Like, you see this stuff as potential usable tools in the tool chest, but they have to be communicated for you to be able to use them as tools. So, yeah. Yeah,
that was a good one.
Any other final thoughts?
No, I just I'm happy. I'm happy that we played it. I know I've been threatening to make you play it for many years. And,
I think we've reached the end goal of the podcast. This was what it was for.
We're done. This is what it was all for.
For me, I achieved it a couple of years ago when I got you to sing on the podcast. So
that was a master stroke. Master stroke move on that one.
Yours was a lot shorter. Your pain. So you actually won that one.
This is revenge. Yep. I win.
You win. All right. Well, that is our show. We don't have any email this week. They haven't exactly been pouring in over Trespasser. I feel like it's not a game
nobody's playing it.
But
it's a head scratcher. People are like, "What?"
Yeah. What are they playing and why? But if you do have some, you can shoot those to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to see your reviews. Haven't had one in a while. It's one of those ways that we reach out. We don't do any, ad stuff or promotions or any kinds of things like that. We're barely on social media anymore. But we do have a website at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub. You can find my co-host twitching at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I've heard it said that you might stream tonight. Is that
I'm streaming tonight. That is the plan.
I'll drop in for a minute. I got a couple things to do before I go to bed. I can put you on. We have a fan-run Discord. There's a link in the show notes for that. It's a fun place to hang out. They're always chattering about lots of topics, less about Trespasser, but there's some, so you can go check that out. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord, our merch store, which you can find a link to through the Discord, all by Mark Garcia. Have fun coming back to your own very full answering machine this week, and good night.
Good night.